Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we discuss issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for Europe as a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. You see, on May the 9th, 1950, at 6 p.m., the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European house in which today 500 million Europeans live together in peace. This was the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. There has been unprecedented peace between EU member states ever since, as this graph shows. But now, Europe faces a serious possibility of war on the Eastern Front with the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. What is Vladimir Putin up to? How are the Ukrainians responding? And what are the likely prospects? To discuss these questions, we have in the studio today Hanna Hopko and Yuriy Kulakevych from the Ukraine. And I'm very pleased to welcome you both into the studio. Welcome. Hanna, you have a very rich and colorful background. You studied both in Lviv and in Kiev, and you became a journalist. You were very active as a civil society activist. One of your accomplishments is actually making a difference in a smoke-free Ukraine. I read somewhere that even the World Health Organization credited you with the fact that Ukraine has gone down considerably in the ranking of smoking nations. And you became a member of the parliament in 2014 after Maidan revolution, and you served that whole term of office. You were made the chair of the Ukrainian Parliamentary Committee on European and Foreign Affairs, and after which you began very active in an anti-corruption movement. You organized a conference which unfortunately had to just go online because of COVID, and you have been setting up one of the main movers behind the ANTS network, National Interest Advocacy Network. You're doing this all at the same time being a wife and a mother. Your daughter, Sophie, she's 11 now, and I think she played a role in perhaps you choosing not to have another term in office. Might I be correct in saying that? Would that be correct?
Yeah, it's probably one of the reasons. So, but still.
Okay. We'll probably come back to that. Yes. Yeah. And actually, Yuri, you were the one who introduced me to Hanna, took me to her office when I visited your country 2018. And you invited me to come to a meeting of Pentecostal pastors, which I think was a very unique affair, at least what I've experienced in Europe, to see about 150 pastors brought in together from all over the nation to talk about the political situation and the role of the church in society. I don't know any other nation in Europe where you get 150 Pentecostal pastors together to do that. You were actually presenting a copy of the Ukrainian version of Deeply Rooted, my book about Robert Schuman, to all these pastors. And that, for me, was quite a unique event. You've been involved for more than 20 years in church-state relations, and we're going to explore that subject later as well. And together with your wife, Marina, you've been raising 4 active teenagers. And so you are both very concerned about the future of your nation and both very active in that. And so perhaps we can fill out the screen now and just talk a little bit about Hanna. You've made this decision to pull out of politics and to be active in other areas. Tell us about that decision. Was it a difficult decision for you to make?
Thanks, Jeff, for organizing this important discussion. I think after 5 years of my service as the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, in very challenging time, so in 2019, having some proposals to be re-elected for 100%, I decided to take a break and actually to continue my service to my country returning to civil society, and actually my focus foreign affairs, and I continue to defend the interest of Ukraine and international arena using my contacts, stopping Nord Stream 2, building transatlantic solidarity, helping Ukraine to win in this civilizational battle that Putin organized, actually a war against Ukraine. And my daughter is really happy that finally I have more time, but last several months, unfortunately, due to the new potential attacks or incursions or invasions from Russian Federation, my daughter recently told me, like, Mom, you are now less being home, like you used to be a member of parliament. So when finally Ukraine win, and you will spend more time with me and my father.
I remember when Yuri brought me to your office and you had your team there together, you wanted to talk about the story of Robert Schuman and the story of reconciliation and the possibilities of that between Russia and Ukraine. And you told me then that your daughter, who I guess was 8 at the time, maybe 7, she had nightmares at times. She found it very difficult to sleep because of Putin and the threat coming from Russia again. That left a deep impression on me that this is something. This is not just a political question; it's a family question. It's a life question for you all. Yes. You were also involved with anti-corruption campaign. You had hoped to set up a conference that would take everybody to Chernobyl. It was on the anniversary of Chernobyl as well. I think President Macron was going to be involved in this conference as well. But unfortunately, that couldn't go ahead as planned. It went online. But there was a parallel there between how do you contain radiation, how do you contain corruption? That was what you were trying to draw out through that conference, was it not?
Yeah, you are right. So the title of the conference, Democracy in Action, Zero Corruption Conference. And the key idea to find solutions to hybrid threats to democracy, like strategic corruption, disinformation, lawfare, cyber security attacks, and also to show the linkages between the dirty money and how it's negatively influenced environment, and also our lives, and Schröderization, which we are seeing now in Western Europe, and also strategic corruption like Nord Stream 2, because it's about exporting not just gas, but also exporting corruption.
Yes. Yes.
So it's important. So actually, during the conference, and this June 6, 7, there will be second conference, and I hope the situation with COVID will allow us to see more in person, not in hybrid like last year. But I think it's important to continue to discuss how to prevent new attacks from the authoritarian regimes, which are using dirty money, which are using oligarchs as a weapon against democracies in the West and values.
Well, Hanna, I want to come back to that conference right at the end there as we look to the future. But Yuri, let me ask you a little bit. What has been your role in the last 20 years? What's your main activity?
Well, I've been a pastor in the Pentecostal Church in Kiev, but when I was invited to join the headquarters of Ukrainian Pentecostal Church to work with external affairs, including foreign affairs, but also inside of the country, other denominations, state offices, NGO, and public media, I've been involved in many projects, procedures, and processes that influence, or say, the future of the nation. And that's true.
Okay.
Saying that in Ukraine you find very few countries where the church still is the leader of society trust. So
Yes.
in Ukraine, the church is, according to the recent surveys, still is one of the three leaders people trust: army, volunteers who are mainly Christians, and the church in general, over 70%, which is huge trust, I would say. So the church should say the word, show the example, and change the society. That's what we try to do our best.
Yes, I think there's many of us in the West who are not really aware of the situation in Ukraine and would often equate Ukraine and Russia as the same. And I hope that we'll make it clear today that's not the case. And particularly in the situation with the church, it's a very different situation in Ukraine as it is in Russia. But we'll come to that. So let's come to our first question then. And that is, what is the current situation on the borders of your country, and what is Vladimir Putin up to? A lot of people are just saying, well, yeah, this goes back to the collapse of the Soviet Union when Putin got burnt, and he vowed to reestablish the power of the Soviet Union or Russia, the Russian Empire. Other people would say, actually, it's a much longer story than that. And I wonder what your take is on this, particularly Hanna. Here we see a BBC map showing where the current troop locations are. And it seems the latest I've heard is that Putin has already assembled 70% of an army that would be sufficient for an occupation of Ukraine. Question is, what is he really up to? Is it bluff? Is it? But that's where I think we need to get the full background to this to try to understand what is going on in that brain of his. So, Hanna, let's hear from you.
Thanks a lot. So regarding the threats at necessary military assistance, so Russia has deployed about 120,000 troops in the north, east, and south of Ukraine, including about 92,000 being land forces and rest air and naval forces. So main places of dislocation like Yelnya, Klintsy, Voronezh, Boguchar, and Novoozernoye in Crimea. So actually, within all this massive buildup, Putin, I could say, like prepared for a major attack, military attack on Ukraine, and there are many military options, including the Belarusian territory. So now he has even more options to for new invasion incursion into Ukraine. And all diplomatic efforts from the US, UK, and our Western allies so far hasn't resulted in de-escalation. So we haven't seen any withdrawal of Russian troops from the Ukrainian border. But I could say that Ukrainians will resist, and we have important legislation started to be implemented on the territorial defense, and all Ukrainians already starting to be ready to defend our country, because one of the scenario it's also hybrid destabilization scenario inside Ukraine, using the fifth column and also cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. So actually, we know how Putin behaves within this 8 years of ongoing Russian hybrid war, because it started in 2014 from Green Man and illegal annexation of Crimea, and 14,000 of Ukrainians' lives have been killed during these 8 years of Russian war. 1.6 million of IDPs, internally displaced people. So why I'm telling this important information? Because every life matters for us. And of course, we will defend our country, but it's also important to know for our Western partners that we are not ready for any painful compromises. So if some Western European leaders think that at the cost of Ukraine or at the expense of Ukrainian national interest, they will appease Putin, so it will create actually new attempts to destabilize not just Ukraine, but the security at the European continent. So no appeasement to the aggressor, because within 8 years, instead of demonstrating values-based approach and saying Putin no, because actually in 2022, instead of seeing like ceasefire, long-lasting ceasefire, exchange of hostages, all for all, withdrawal of heavy artillery from temporary occupied Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, we are seeing massive build-up, new blackmail, and it's not just about Ukraine. Let me be very clear that Putin's aggression is against Western civilization, and if now we will not stop him, so we will embolden the Chinese in the South China Sea and Taiwan. So it's like two against all. Russia and China, they will support each other in extending their power, aggressive behavior, and of course it's about strong position, because what we've seen that Moscow has always regarded any concessions as a sign of weaknesses. What happened last summer during Biden-Merkel deal on Nord Stream 2? We've seen after all a new heavy artillery at our border and more options for Putin to invade Ukraine again. So now the West should be very clear. Putin, you have 1 week to de-escalate the situation. If not, then Nord Stream 2 finally will be sanctioned and stop, and no more talks, no more statements. So if we do not see within 1 week de-escalation, then sanctions must be finally implemented against this Nord Stream 2 project, which is weaponization of energy. And then sanctions against inner circle of Putin. Why it's needed? Because now Putin took leadership just every time demanding like stop NATO enlargement, asking the US not to deploy new forces in Eastern Europe. So this is something, how to say, nonsense. Putin with very weak economy. It's not like even the economy of the Soviet Union. He is now blackmailing transatlantic community, which is much powerful, which has a lot of lever to stop this man. And also why it's important, it's in the sake of the future of Russian citizens, because they are suffering from such dictator. Because now Russia is turning from authoritarian into the totalitarianism, which happened during the Stalin's time.
Yes.
And which is really important to remind about Munich 1938. And we don't need to see the illusionary peace or hybrid diplomacy. We really would like to see the values-based diplomacy, because this is the only way to show the strengths of West and to see a true peace and justice and restore of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine.
So, Hanna, it sounds to me, I think you used the term not civilizational, but what is at stake here is a clash of a Western civilization based on values, and we can call it Eurasian or Eastern civilization based on authority and power. How far back does that kind of thinking go? Is this related to what Samuel Huntington talked about 30 years ago, he talked about the clash of civilizations, and we thought of it in terms of the West versus Islam, but he also did talk about a Russian authoritarianism as well, even then.
So actually, you are right, because Moscow's imperial behavior began centuries ago and continues today. Last year, it was 300th anniversary of the renaming of what had been known as the Grand Duchy of Moscovia, as the Russian Empire by Peter I, who is, by the way, a favorite political leader of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So 300 years ago, Peter the First has stolen the name of Kievan Rus just to rename Moscovia, and actually by appropriating its legacy through this lie, Peter tried to lend legitimacy to his claim to rule over his neighbors. So stealing the part of name of Ukraine, because Jeff, you visited Kiev. In Kiev, there are my favorite place is St. Sophia Cathedral, which was built at the beginning of 11th century when Moscow didn't exist. And in St. Sophia Cathedral, in 2018, as I remember, we had the year of Bible in Ukraine. And the whole Bible was the first time in our history written from scratch until the end by many political leaders, activists, religious organizational leaders. So it's very sacral.
Read out loud, was it?
Sorry?
They read it out loud.
Yes. Yuriy could provide you more information because he was among key organizer of this event. And also when Ukraine received Tomos and Autosopholy for the Orthodox Church, also the decision of Ukrainian Orthodox Church leaders also was adopted in St. Sophia Cathedral. So St. Sophia Cathedral, and by the way, the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who recently visited Ukraine, and we are very thankful to UK, Poland, because this was joint visit to Kiev. And he also paid a visit to St. Sophia Cathedral, demonstrating Putin and Russian propaganda that Ukraine is the center of European civilization, not Moscow. Because when our king, Yaroslav Weiss, was sending his daughters to France, to UK, and just a kind reminder that the Anna Kievska, the Queen of France. So this is the connection between Ukraine and France, UK, Norway, Sweden. It has 1,000 years of roots. So we belong to Europe. This is a part of our identity. So, and all, propaganda, all narratives that we are one nation. So it's a false narrative. It's a way to attack us and to grab our history, occupy our territories. But we would like to make Russia free from Ukraine dependence.
Yes.
And they have to build independent state without grabbing our territory and killing our people.
Yes. Now, this understanding of history, Putin has actually got a 5,000-word essay on the official website where he's spelling this out, saying there's no difference between the Russians and the Ukrainians. But actually, it probably goes back to when the Mongols came through, and there's been a split ever since then that's been quite distinct. Is that correct? Yuriy, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. But to make long story short, we are to remember one more thing discussing the present situation. Putin, according to his personal confession, see the collapse of USSR as the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century.
Yes.
That what is behind all his planning and actions against Ukraine, but also Belarus, which is occupied now. and Kazakhstan, and threat that he creates to other stans and Caucasus and Baltic states, and even bigger. So we are clearly to understand that there are two big things that we as a nation are to do, and we actually do, remembering all the church motto, ora et labora, pray and work. Pray and work. We, the churches in Ukraine, had the long-lasting agreement for months that we have prayer meetings every night. Like tonight at 8:30, the church I'm pastoring, for the last 3 weeks, every evening we have the prayer meeting. Same with Orthodox, Catholics, Greek Catholics, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Charismatic, Free Churches, name any other. Everybody is praying, but also everybody is working to support all good initiative, supporting the informational part of the protection of the defense we create. We communicate all the churches around the world, asking for, first of all, prayer. I just learned recently there is a church in Sweden that had prayer meetings for Ukraine 2 weeks ago, 3 times a day. Can you believe?
Is that right?
7 in the morning, 12 in the noon, retired people, 7 p.m. people going back home from their offices, they come to the church and pray for Ukraine. And I thank you very much, people of Western and Nordic Europe, for your prayer support, because out of our Ukrainian experience in 1991, 2004, 2014, we saw it many times in our recent history, tremendous invasion from the Lord to protect the nation, to help us and to lead us out of the biggest threat that you could never think how you can get out of. So we continue working. Working, I mean, many churches seeing all these troops packed behind our borders, the churches develops plan B, we say. What if there is cyber attack that will turn the mobile connection off? Or what if there is no electricity in the region? What if there is something else is damaged? What do we do? How do we communicate? How do we serve our society? We have plan B for any of these situations, that sometimes we are to stand next to the state to serve the nation.
Tell me, Yuri,
Ready.
what is the how united are the Ukrainian people? Many countries in the West are very polarized around issues. Is there polarization between Russian speakers and Ukrainians? And Hanna, you mentioned the phrase fifth columnists a little while ago. How united is the nation?
We are very thankful to Vladimir Putin for uniting Ukrainian nation. He is doing great job on it. Even people in Sumy and Chernihiv and Kharkiv and Donetsk and Lugansk, eastern and Nordic regions of Ukraine, they are now much more pro-Ukrainian, or should I say pro-Western, than 8 years ago, let's say.
Pro-freedom, pro-democracy, pro-rule of law.
They see the difference. Yeah. They travel abroad much more. They can learn easily what they see on the street in comparison what's behind the border. What their relatives or friends from Kursk or Belgorod or any other regions of Russian Federation explain to them what's the lifestyle, what are the requirements from the state, which are getting tougher and tougher for any single citizen.
Yes, well, in Russia too, the church freedom has been very much limited.
Yes.
What many of us in the West don't realize, that many of the churches in Russia are actually pastored. I'm talking about Protestant evangelical churches are pastored by Ukrainians. How do those Ukrainians living in Russia, and there are millions of them, how do they understand the situation? Are you in touch with your Pentecostal brothers there?
Yes, as you know, the biggest Russian Pentecostal national church, led by Eduard Grabovenko, who is originally from Kryvyi Rog, Ukrainian missionary sent to Russian Federation to preach the gospel in his 20s, in 1990, I believe. Now he's leading the national Pentecostal movement. Of course, I cannot say much because it's quite a sensitive issue.
Yes.
But we from our side, as a sending country, we provide them with our prayer support and any other support we can offer. Me personally, as the member of Pentecostal Commission on Religious Liberty that unites the Pentecostal leaders from around the globe who fight for religious liberty, we keep close eye on the situation in Russian Federation.
Yes.
And we know a lot of details. We write a lot of letters, at least to keep the world informed on what is going on and how can we help, not only with prayer, which of course is the most important part, but also advocacy. We are not to keep silence on what is going on in Russian Federation, but also in Belarus, because situation is changing very much on the model what already had Russians.
Well, of course, with the military,
Belarus.
Belarus is a country that's been occupied militarily now, as well as a byproduct, and that may be one of the conscious goals of Putin. But Hanna, you mentioned the year 2014. I think it was almost exactly to the week that the little green men began appearing in Crimea, and of course the Russians knew nothing about that. They said, and so when they say they have no plans to invade Ukraine now, we know, we take that with a grain of salt. But this was no accident. How is this related to the events in Maidan, and what was really Maidan all about?
Thank you, Jeff. Actually, you are right. Russia continues to lie in order to deny its role as an aggressor state. And the famous phrase, "Nas tam нет," we are not there. So actually, in 2014, I think this was the pivotal moment in our modern history when we restored independence, when Soviet Union collapsed. So it was about civilizational choice of the citizens of Ukraine. We were against the decision of the former president of Ukraine and inner circle, which among them were lots of pro-Russian oriented official representatives, let's be honest, and they dictated this decision that Ukraine is not ready to sign the association agreement with the European Union, and we have to be back to the Russian sphere of influence and to be part of the economic custom union, which belongs to the Eurasian big political union. So, and we said no, and the protests when millions of Ukrainians from different regions, the smallest cities, and representatives of different religious organizations, which was also show and demonstrate the strength of Ukraine and also the tolerance society. So there were Armenian, Jewish, also Georgian, Muslims, Orthodox. So everybody was united by the idea that we are fighting for dignity. So dignity as a key element of the society which we want to live in. And it was also about the respect of everybody's contribution to build a country with rule of law, strong institutions. And during Maidan, or Revolution of Dignity, we've also seen probably the ideal type or model of society, self-organized, when people sacrifice their lives for bigger idea. So, and the spirit, I would say, the God blessed us, because if we compare what's happened in Belarus after falsification of presidential election and when protest with the Russian interference within last almost 2 years, people are suffering, a lot of tortures happened. So God and our belief in God helped us to win. And Yanukovych, former president, left the country, but Russia invaded Ukraine in the moment of the protest. So this was also one of the scenario written in Moscow before, when we were focusing on fighting with the traitors or president who betrayed country's interest. So they sent green mans and actually Russian GRU and FSB to start their invasion into Ukraine. And but Maidan is about a passion of the whole nation. It couldn't happen like each protest against like different issues, social issues, pension issues, and others. It's a spirit of the whole nation, and to defend the future and actually to be together.
And Maidan actually means independent square. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And what we're looking at in this photo, it looks like a war zone, and in some ways it was. I wish we could take all of our listeners to Maidan to see the monuments that are there now, the sculptures that have been carved, that have been made there from iron, very creative sculptures that tell the stories of different people. Some of the 100 heroes that were the people who were shot by the security guards, and some of the stories that are told there about when they heard the church bells that were saying this is a safe place to go to, and that the church was taking the side of the people. Then I knew there was a God. I remember reading that there, and for me that's very significant. That here you have an Orthodox church prepared to side with the people and not with the state, because always through history the Orthodox Church has sided with the state. That seemed to be was that an unprecedented thing, or has there been other times in history where that's happened? It seemed to me like this was very significant.
So Yuriy, maybe you should.
Yeah, Yuriy.
It
Okay,
was.
I can also respond. I can. Yuriy.
It was. Looking back, we can say that Maidan, the revolution of dignity, can be pinned as one of the spiritual revivals in the history of Ukraine. And these are not just the words, because I do remember these prayer tents around Maidan, and put by evangelicals, put by Greek Catholics, put by Orthodox priests.
You said prayer tents.
Prayer tents, yes,
yeah,
prayer
okay.
tents.
Yeah.
And people never asked what denomination you are.
No.
They just came, talked to pastor, talked to priest, asked for prayer, asked for help, asked for some reconciliation with what is going on in his head. So it was clearly for the whole world. This is not just the rebellion of people. This is something much bigger. Ukraine was going out of last pieces of Soviet atheistic history. Mm-hmm. We are always to remember it. And when we remember of Maidan revolution, we always remember the pastoral care provided to every single person who needed it. Hundreds of pastors and priests being there days and nights. Every Sunday noon, before the big VHS starts with political talks, we first had 3-5 pastors and priests sharing the message from the Bible for a few minutes and prayer, and next one, and next one. And many people told me later, it kept us going.
Yeah.
It kept us going. The message you delivered from the pulpit, from the stage, it kept us going. It gave us inner fuel to continue. So when we speak of the church profit from the days, I should say that the revolution of dignity led to wider discussion inside of the church about a wider or bigger involvement of the church in the society life.
Let's come back to that, Yuriy. Hanna, you've got something to say, and what was your role there, Hanna?
So it's when Yuriy was saying this, really, it's a lot of memories, because this was without believing God, you couldn't win. So because there were painful moments when my best friends like Igor Lutsenko, who became later a member of parliament, he was kidnapped together with another activist who was killed, actually. So to stay at Maidan and to without fear, without belief in God, it was impossible. So God protected Ukraine, and God protected all of us, and actually God protected Ukraine. So I truly believe that Ukraine as a country, we as a nation, where are a lot of different people with ethnic minorities, different religions. So still we have a global mission. It's like spiritually, we have to revive these values, Christian values, because this is the true foundation of building strong house, European house. And of course, I remember Maidan and all the protests, and we organized a civic sector of EuroMaidan, when unite a lot of representatives of civil society organizations, think tanks. We work very close with Council of Europe. We brought to Ukraine Commissioner of Human Rights. So the idea was to bring foreigners to stop Yanukovych and his team, to stop repressions. And I saw the role of churches during Maidan. So their contribution to this unity was incredible. It was tremendous to see. And now at the front line, also churches are very helpful, providing support to soldiers. And it's a unique example when the role of churches in transformation of Ukraine well recognized and really very important.
Well, you've led us now into this next question. What is the role of the church in politics? What should be the role? Because I think there's a lot of confusion. We can see what's been going on in America the last few years as well. And here we see a picture. Well, Yuriy, do you want to explain what we're seeing here?
Yes, it's famous picture. Some Orthodox priests and some evangelical pastors and laity people, they stand together between the soldiers and protesters in order to prevent any harm to anybody. And we saw the picture in many places. Yes.
So what does this say about the role of the church in politics? And before we explain that further, I want to mention this book here, A Future and a Hope. We originally asked actually Michael Cherenkov, one of the co-authors of this book, to join us, but he was unable to do so. Joshua Searle, the other co-author, actually was on our Schuman Talk a few months ago. And in this book, it talks about what Yuriy you were just beginning to say about how Maidan has drawn out the church into a new role. And I'm just going to read some quotes from this book here before I ask you to comment further, Yuriy. Maidan has demonstrated the extent to which the church belongs in the city center of public life, the center of spiritual life, are almost completely congruent. They come together. The church's main interest in an open society should be society and not the state. That's a very important comment, because I think sometimes we've gotten it wrong in America, where the church has crossed the line in its support for particular political parties and entities. This word symphonia is well known in the Orthodox world as explaining the relationship between the church and the state. And that is something that Putin is very strong on right now with the Russian Orthodox Church. But here we're talking about the church and society, but not the state. And here's another quote, that the church cannot agitate for either the European Union or the customs union. That was the whole reason for the Maidan protest, that the church can only emphasize the importance of a free and responsible choice. But the church cannot fail to condemn the use of force against the defenseless and to speak out against corruption, like you've been doing, Hanna, and selective justice and political repression. Let me just go on to the next page with a couple of other quotes as well, that Maidan forced Christians to address a question that they long avoided. And that's not just Ukrainian Christians, but Christians throughout Europe and different parts of the world. In what ways is the gospel not only the source of personal salvation, but also the source of social transformation? Why is it that we, as evangelical Christians, seem to take an unseemly relish in exposing the sins of ordinary people in our churches, but maintain a cowardly silence concerning the sins of those in power? And perhaps sometime we can talk about these two terms, Homo Sovieticus and Homo Maidanis, perhaps, as we talk about the future. But Yuriy, what is changing there in the church, and what is the role of the church in the future of Ukraine?
We are to remember always that it's a very new, well, it was very new for us in Ukraine after 70 years of Soviet occupation, when the church was put to margins of the society life. But situations like Maidan, Orange Revolution first, and then the Revolution of Dignity, brought the church to the understanding that we as a church have much bigger responsibility in society life than we are used to during the occupation era. I always like to mention my grandfather, who was Pentecostal pastor, and he was sent to working camps to far Russia for years. My uncle, he was taken to the chemistry industry zone for rehabilitation, they called it, letting his wife stay with 5 children at home alone. So when Ukraine became independent, we more often and more clearly understand the text from Apostle Paul when he writes to church in Corinth that the spiritual person can have suggestions about every issue, item, or decision taken, including politics. I strongly believe it. I strongly believe it. And of course, it's very unusual for people of my father generation. It's okay for me, but it's very easy to accept generation of my children. They do not remember any of the regime, and they clearly understand everything means everything. We are, as a church, to prepare people properly gifted to be the best politicians, the best lobbyists, the best mayors, the best whatever professional activity they are involved, working with the worldview, which is to be biblical, and second, understanding of the responsibility for the gifts you receive from the Creator. That's why we have all these, I call it political conferences and training and schools for young people from universities. We bring them closer to develop them, and for they serve in the society not only as the best nurses or teachers, but also the best society leaders, best politicians. We want them to do whatever they do for the glory of God, even in political realm, which many people in Ukraine still want to be the darkest place of society life. But light is coming.
Yuri, I understand in recent elections, a lot of Christians, genuine Christians, were elected into parliament and to other government roles and mayoral positions in cities. Can you comment on that? Maybe Hanna, you have a comment too.
Yes, that's true, and many. I would say dozens, even hundreds of people who are deeply rooted, using your language, Jeff, deeply rooted in the biblical foundation, now working in the state offices. They are council members, local or national level. They're working for different administrations in state agencies and ministries. And their bosses, they offer, when I ask about them, the best comments on them. They say, give us more these people. They give us more of these people that we can trust the country.
Yes, and Hanna, how does this compare with the situation for the church, say, in Crimea or in Russia?
Jeff, you know the situation in Russian Federation. Unfortunately, the highest hierarchy of Russian Orthodox Church supports the Putin regime. And even in the Russian legislation, it's written that repression of the religious groups allowed because they are deemed as extremists. So this is why it's hard really to split the churches that serve God, and really God is in the first place and they follow God, and they just, how to say, прислуга, this serving the leader of, and they mixed leadership of the country with God as our true leader. And also when they keep silent, seeing the repressions of religious organizations, and what's happened in occupied Crimea and in Donetsk, and and you know, I was one who supported the autocephaly of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, not just because I'm the believer in God, because I understand that this is the issue of national security of Ukraine. And independence of Ukraine Orthodox Church is an existential threat to Russian vision of Ruski Mir, Russian world. When Putin used church and still using church, Orthodox Church, to spread his power in Belarus. And one day I would love to see the Belarusian Orthodox Church independent, like Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and not to allow FSB through church to control domestically situation in Belarus. So this is weaponization of energy, weaponization of church. So this is how Russian from Stalin to Putin machine is working, which is really very dangerous, and it's nothing related to real belief of people, and it's manipulation. And I remember this awful picture when one priest in occupied Crimea was blessed missiles system S-400. So can you imagine a representative of church blessing weapon which has to kill people not just in Ukraine with their how to say distance to of rockets, like to Europe or Mediterranean?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that brings us really to our last question, and that is, how do you see the future uh, of the Ukraine? And it brings us back to our friend Robert Schuman, and here we see him with de Gasperi and Adenauer, the three believing fathers of the European Union who shared the same biblical values. And Schuman said himself that peace would not be saved other than a return to the foundations of our Christian civilization. He said democracy must be Christian or it will not be. He said it will become tyranny or anarchy. Now, he understood, and actually Adenauer said to him too, he thought it was providential that God had allowed the main task of this rebuilding of Europe after the war to rest on the shoulders, he said, of our brother de Gasperi and you and myself, to see the foundations built, Europe built on Christian foundations. How do you understand this? How do you see the future of Ukraine?
So the value-based European community and Euro-Atlantic civilization maintained peace and unity for decades under constant pressure from Soviet Union because they have not given up the values. And you mentioned Schuman and Adenauer Christian values. So this helped them to defend European continent and not to allow Soviet Union. And what we would like to see now, that our European friends returning to their roots and keep remembering that without values, you cannot achieve sustainable peace. You cannot achieve any peace.
Yeah.
Because all attempts of appeasement of the aggressor is return us to the Munich 1938 and the consequences of the big war. So our message is Ukraine suffered a lot. So our struggle is not just about struggle for the future of Ukraine. So we are Europe, and we would like to see Europe prosperous, Europe with dignity, and of course with peace. But without, how to say, strong and values-based approaches, unfortunately, we will not see the result of all negotiations. And 8 years of Russian ongoing war, and now when we are seeing like every day the leaders like from Western countries coming to Ukraine, trying to somehow settle this and avoid the big war, so demonstrates that they lost this approach from scratch. So, and Georgia in 2008, when somebody thought that we have to close eyes, no, but without values to solve and to win with the aggressors or authoritarian regimes, it's impossible.
Yes. Now, Yuri, the irony is that Vladimir Putin thinks he's the great defender of Christian values. This is the language he's using against a corrupt, atheistic West. How do we explain this discrepancy?
I always say to my friends and colleagues in many European capitals, you should not become Soviet Union to believe that this is the worst that can happen to you. Believe us, we've been there. We've been there. We know what Vladimir Putin has in mind when he used this religion proper language, but his actions speak much louder than his words. In Ukraine, we see Christians are more and more requested to form Christian agenda for Ukrainian society. I see it in all the regions on the very domestic, let's say, grassroots level, but these young people growing, developing in their professional skills and work. And I see that Ukraine may become the center of conservative, being built on biblical base, biblical values for the whole Europe. I'm feel myself very, very sorry often when I only hear the stories what happened to Christian Europe decades or 100 years ago, and how much it is different from what we see today on European cities, streets, and church buildings. So we in Ukraine, we work to develop Ukrainian society more on biblical values. Last Friday, we had the meeting with chairman of Ukrainian Parliament as a Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, discussing with him, the chairman of legislative body, how can we work together for the good of Ukrainian society and the best possible future of Ukrainian nation. This is one part, but we're praying for Europe that we know had good roots, had fantastic foundation that we always was only dreaming about when we read deeply rooted. We missed it in our history, but we are building it for coming generations of Ukrainians and nearby countries, and help us, oh Lord, for the whole Europe. And let us do it together.
Yes, there are a lot of people in Western Europe and in America who are afraid of conservative Christians who seem to want to turn the clock back to a Christendom where Christians control everything. So long as we get the Christians in power in all these places, this is what actually a lot of evangelical Christians, unfortunately, seem to be preaching. But we're talking here about government that is for justice for all, not just for Christians, but for all. And this is a challenge we have. How can we flesh this out? How can we become rerouted in the values of the past? And as you've said, Ukraine is a very important country, I think, for the future of the whole of Eurasia, and needs to get it right. And so let's go back to your Democracy in Action conference, Hanna. What is this all about? And what do you dream about this producing?
So within last 30 years, Ukraine proved that we are democracy in action. So geopolitical importance of Ukraine is growing. We became a contributor of European security. Also, we produce solutions to hybrid threats to democracy. So we have a potential to become a regional leader. And of course, we realized all failures, problems we still have, and oligarchs and others. So we are not like closing eyes and dreaming. So we are working hard every day to clean the system from kleptocrats. But I think within these 30 years, we just proved that we are a very dynamic nation which deserve to be a part of a European family. Because this is our roots, and actually we belong to European civilization for centuries, or for more than 1,000 years. And if we look into the future, so I truly believe that Ukraine's role in democratization of Russian Federation is very important. And it's also a security interest of the collective West. So success of Ukraine is a nightmare for Putin, but for Russian citizens, it's a great example how they have to behave and demand from their leadership, not to create poverty, but to create dignity. Because all these tortures, all this how suffer about indigenous people which are living in Idel, Ural, Povolzhia, Yakutia, Ichkeria. So we are expressing our solidarity for those who are under repressions from Putin's regime, because one day we would like to see them free. And also what's going on with Uyghurs, also all these tortures and others. So it's about dignity, it's about choice of citizens, about dignity societies. This is why Ukraine is important for not just European continent and globally.
And how do the young Ukrainians see the future themselves? How are they the key?
Ukrainians, young Ukrainians, so they consider them as the Europeans. 75% of Ukrainians, they consider Ukrainian language as a native one. So it's so no polarization as it used to be previously, and some pro-Russian forces, they used language issue to split, to divide the nation. So now 78% of the population consider Ukrainian language as a native one. 52 consider and support membership in NATO. So Euro-Atlantic course of Ukraine is unchangeable, irreversible, and youngest generation, they play a key role. We just recently conducted a project, a youth model of NATO PA, Parliamentary Assembly, because this May there will be historic Parliamentary Assembly of NATO in Kyiv. And the youth, with their Euro-Atlantic identity, contributed a lot. So this is the generation which were born in independent Ukraine, because I was born in 1982 when still Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union. But my daughter and the generations of 90s, so they belong to the free societies, and freedom, this is a part of their identity.
Mm-hmm. So Yuriy, do you have any last word you would like to say to the listeners in Western Europe? You're muted.
Yes, I'm fine. Yeah, I would say that the recipe for all of us to escape all the troubles you mentioned, and of course they are even bigger. I always say to my Christian Democrats around the Europe and in Ukraine, let us be good Christians, and then with democracy is also will be fine. That's very easy. Let's be the most close, believing as children to what is written on these pages of our Bibles. And less people will be afraid of Christians trying to reverse the history.
Yes.
They will come to us closer and will say, let's do it together. But number one requirement is let us be as close to our Bibles as possible. And may the Lord bless us in all good intentions and plans.
Hanna, any last word from you?
God bless Ukraine. God bless the world. And actually, if we follow the God and not putting ourselves at the beginning, so actually then we will have everything in place and peace and stable security. And this is, on the one hand, very easy. On the other, it's very important.
So let me pray for Ukraine. May your kingdom come. May your will be done in Ukraine, in Russia, in Crimea, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Hanna. Thank you, Yuriy.
Thank you.
This has been very, very stimulating and enlightening and challenging.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
To hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.